So let me share my screen here. Let's say the blessing for study together. If you'd like to unmute in order to say the blessing, you can feel free to unmute now, and that way we can hear one another bless. And then we're going to jump into some Hasidic stories about and for the high holy days. Let's say together. Baruch
Baruch
atah
atah Adonai Eloheinu melech
asher
asher
kidshanu
kishanu
b'mitzvotav
mizmatav
v'tzivanu
v'tzivanu
la'asok
asok b'dvrei Torah.
Which means in Hebrew, blessed is the one whose mitzvot make our lives holy and who commands us to immerse ourselves, to engage ourselves in words of Torah. So, of course, as you all know, the purpose of this weekly Torah or this weekly study session is to find hope, to look for tikvah, both in the text themselves and also in the act of study. We need a lot of hope this time of year, and maybe this year in particular. And that was, of course, why we launched this program to begin with. The high holidays are often, I think, a time where we need to seek tikvah, where we need to seek hope. And what I thought we'd do is to look at a few stories from the Hasidic masters. And this material was on my mind anyway, because I had prepared another class on Monday that some of you were at. How many of you were at the class on Monday where we looked at Hasidic texts? So some, okay, some and not all, that's great. This is none of the same material. What we're looking at here are stories that were collected by Martin Buber, the scholar and theologian Martin Buber, of essentially stories that the Hasidim tell about their Rebbes. This comes from this book, which is called, actually, this is not the right book. Yeah, no, this is the right book, sorry. This comes from this book, which is called Tales of the Hasidim. And this is the early masters. There's a later masters. There's a whole compilation about the Baal Shem Tov himself, where Buber has pulled together these stories that the Hasidim tell about their Rebbes. And so I wanted to look at a couple of stories where the notion of tshuva, or repentance, plays an important role in order to see or ask ourselves the question of where is the tikvah? Where is the hope? What's hopeful about what's being said here? So I'd love to have a discussion. If you have thoughts to share, please feel free to raise your hand. That way I'll see everybody, or if you can't figure out how to do that, just wave at me. There's not that many of us and I will be able to see you, or put your thoughts into the chat, any of the above, and I'll try to keep an eye on the chat as well. So we have here, these are all going to be about different Rebbes. This all is taking place in what we call the Pale of Settlement, which is where a lot, but not all of our ancestors came from. In pretty much, let's call it, the 18th to 19th centuries. That's when classical Hasidic Judaism really thrived, in the period after the Baal Shem Tov, the founder of Hasidic Judaism, and before the 20th century, when, for a variety of reasons, including mass immigration, including the Holocaust, the Hasidic movement changed irrevocably. So we're looking at the classical period of Hasidic Judaism here, and the stories that these Hasidim, the members of the Hasidic communities, tell about themselves, as Martin Buber captured in the early 20th century, of course, in the years before the Holocaust. So the story tells as follows. There was once a man who had desecrated the Sabbath against his will because his carriage had broken down. And although he walked and almost ran, he did not reach the town before the beginning of the holy hours. So for background here, it is against traditional Jewish law to travel on Shabbat. Can't ride a horse, can't ride in a carriage, can't even walk very far. You can't walk past a certain distance. And so to travel on Shabbat is a desecration of Shabbat. So this guy's carriage breaks down on the side of the road, and he hightails it to try to get to town before Shabbat begins, but he fails. He walks into town after Shabbat has already started, meaning that he traveled on Shabbat. He passed the tchum, he passed the barrier beyond which you're not supposed to travel on Shabbat. For this, the young Rabbi imposed a very harsh and long penance on him. The man tried to do as he had been told with all his strength, but he soon found that his body could not endure it. He began to feel ill, and even his mind was affected. About this time, he learned that the Baal Shem is the founder, the leader of Hasidic Judaism, was traveling through this region and had stopped in a place nearby. He went to him, mustered his courage, and begged the master to rid him of the sin he had committed. What does the Baal Shem Tov say? I'm going to just give us another paragraph here. Carry a pound of candles to the house of prayer, said the Baal Shem, and have them lit for the Sabbath. Let that be your penance. The man thought that the tzaddik, the Baal Shem Tov, had not quite understood what he had told him, and he repeated his request more urgently. When the Baal Shem insisted on his incredibly mild dictum, the man told him how heavy a penance had been imposed on him by Rabbi Micah. The master replied, "You just do as I said, and tell Rabbi Micah to come to the city of Chvastov, where I shall hold the coming Sabbath." The man's face had cleared. He took leave of the rabbi. I suppose this is the following week, on the way to Chvastov, a wheel broke on Rabbi Michal's carriage, and he had to continue on foot. Although he hurried all he could, it was dark when he entered the town. And when he crossed the Baal Shem's threshold, he saw that the Baal Shem, had already risen, his cup in his hand, to say the blessing over the wine, to introduce the town of the day of rest. The master paused and said to Rabbi Michael, who was standing before him numb and speechless, "Good Sabbath, my sinless friend. You had never tasted the sorrow of the sinner. Your heart had never throbbed with his despair, so it was easy for your hand to deal out penance." All right, I'm going to stop for a second and ask your reactions. What's the lesson? What's the message? What do you think, or what does it bring up for you as you read this story? Anybody want to share any thoughts with us? Bob, please.
Guy, the Baal Shem Tov doesn't mess around, huh?
I know
He's got exactly the response in mind, and whether it's a magical thing that he made this happen, or he just knew that in the process of traveling on Friday, it's likely to have some kind of a problem and not make the trip. So this is wonderful.
Yep.
So there, Rabbi Mikhail.
I especially enjoy the sarcasm of "Good Sabbath, Shabbat Shalom, my sinless friend," right? And it's noted toward the beginning of the story, this is the young Rabbi Michael. So Rabbi Michael learns a lesson here about humility, maybe also learns a message here about what it is to do wrong, right? That it's easy to condemn the sins of others when we haven't yet put ourselves in the feet or in the shoes of others. Sabrina, what do you see? And then Carol.
I see that the Baal Shem is somebody who identifies with his neighbor and assumes the goodness of everyone.
Yeah, and you know, for those of us who were there on Monday, we looked at some early stories about the Baal Shem Tov, including the fact that he apparently was known in his early years for skipping Hebrew school. They don't call it exactly that, but he would leave, you know, he would get bored. He had trouble focusing for that long, and so he would go out and he would, you know, wander in nature. And so, you know, the Baal Shem Tov they use the word tzaddik, which means a righteous person, to describe the Rebbes, but the Baal Shem Tov seems to have a sense that part of being human is to be imperfect. That's what Rabbi Michael seems to miss here, right? That the approach to this person may not be about penance at all, and there may actually be no sin to forgive. That this is a mistake made by a person. Of course, the mistake here is, we would say, relatively benign, right? Walking too far on Shabbat. But is the larger message here, as you say, Sabrina, to look for the good in people rather than looking for the bad, to relate to people as people who can learn rather than as someone who needs punishment. Carol, what's your take?
I'd sum it up as Rabbi Micah was lacking in compassion, which is supposedly one of the big issues that we are supposed to incorporate in our teachings, and lacking in empathy.
Yeah.
And he was called on it.
He's missing the human side, right? And
Right.
we've all been young and we've all been zealous. And so, does Rabbi Michael learn a lesson here that he will then carry with him? And so in some sense, if we're looking for tikvah, if we're looking for hope, is in some way the hope here, both in the willingness to look for the good in the person, even when they've done wrong, but also in the ability to learn. I think we can imagine that Rabbi Michael, because he is a great Hasidic Rebbe, that he learns from this and he goes on to be able to do better later in his life. How can we learn if we don't ever screw up, right? This is Rabbi Michael's screw up that we hope leads him to learn an important lesson about humanity. Vicky, please.
Well, I think to go along with that, and I think you said it, but Rabbi Michael has to gain insight into himself to be able to see what he and understand what he was quick to judge, make judgment, and then gain that knowledge from that and build on that. It's interesting because someone from another group was writing on how do I get rid of my anger or something like that. And people were giving suggestions, but if you look at your anger, then you have to, if you initially lash out or do something, then you have to do some self-reflection as what's underneath all that to see what's causing that. And there's the lesson, there's the hope.
Right.
Wow.
That's really interesting, Vicky. Why does Rabbi Michael behave the way he does? It's not about the man. It's entirely about Rabbi Michael, right? The
Right.
ways we act are entirely about us. And isn't that the task of the High Holy Days, to understand why we act the ways that we act? Not to be perfect, but to know yourself.
Yeah.
Thank you. I see Jody, who hasn't spoken yet, and then Susan, and then Bob.
If it's okay to raise a little comparative tangent, I was thinking of Rachel Remen's book Kitchen Table Blessings, in which she talks about the spiritual blessings given to her by her grandfather, who I believe was an Orthodox rabbi. And the grandfather, as a young father, was tyrannical and insisted on the letter of the law to the point that he alienated his kids. And it was only later in life as a grandfather that he was able to embrace the spirit of the law and pass that on to his granddaughter.
Yeah, thank you for that comparison. I don't know the book, but it's the question of is it better to be kind than right? Right? Rabbi Michael is technically not wrong here, but does Rabbi Michael do anything that will help this chassid to grow in his connection with God or Judaism or in his self-actualization? That's a great point. Susan, please, and then Bob. Oh, Susan, you're on mute. Are you able to unmute there?
Okay.
There we go.
Yeah, and it has to do with judgment. We're supposed to give each other the benefit of the doubt rather than jumping to a judgment when we don't know the backstory. It's the principle of walking in someone else's shoes before you start telling them what to do.
Yeah, I love it. That's a great way to put it. Thank you. Bob, please.
I can't help noticing that there are issues here about travel as well, and maybe it's because I'm traveling tomorrow and have to make a flight connection with only about 30 minutes between flights, etc. But maybe a lesson here that Rabbi Michael failed to learn was maybe he should have left on Thursday to be sure that he wouldn't have a problem getting where he was going. After all, he's going to see the Baal Shem Tov. That's sort of important.
Yeah,
But
it's interesting you say that, Bob. I'm traveling tomorrow too, by the way, so I also have travel on the mind. But you know, Rabbi Michael makes the exact same mistake. He could have learned from what the other guy did, right? But he's so busy condemning the other guy for traveling on Shabbat that he doesn't actually take a step back and say, well, what's the situation? What got us here? And then he behaves in exactly the same way as the first guy, rather than learning from the situation in any way. One more comment, and then I think I want to show you another story. Carol, please.
Now we're doing the same thing. We don't know the backstory about why he couldn't leave a day early.
Fair
And
enough.
we're saying, well, he should have left a day early and then this wouldn't have happened. So we're doing the same thing. We're judging him without knowing what the full story is.
Carol, you make an excellent point. And actually, that's a good segue to our next story, which is about Rabbi Wolf of, I honestly don't know how to say that, Zbaraj. He's the son of Rabbi Michael. So we're in the next generation. Reb Wolf was said to have been born the most humble person on earth. And Reb Wolf, as you see here, saw no evil in any person and regarded all human beings as righteous. Once it says, when two people were quarreling and Rabbi Wolf was asked to side against the one who was guilty, he said, according to me, one is as good as the other. And who could venture to come between two righteous people? So I wonder if because he's the son of Rabbi Michael, that he grows up never wanting to judge anyone, right? And I think we have to ask ourselves, is this for better or for worse? But I want to read two more stories about Reb Wolf, and then we'll talk about him. So a Chassid complained to Rabbi Wolf that certain persons were turning night into day playing cards. They're playing cards. This is bad, right? They're gambling, they're playing cards. What does this tzaddik say? What does Reb Wolf say? That's good. Like all people, they want to serve God and don't know how. But now they're learning to stay awake and persist in doing something. When they become perfect in this, all they need to do is turn to God, and what excellent servants they will make for God then. So that's the first story, and I'll read you one more story from Reb Wolf. One night, thieves entered Rabbi Wolf's house and took whatever they happened to find. So he's robbed in the middle of the night. From his room, the tzaddik watched them, but did not do anything to stop them. When they were through, they took some utensils, and among them, a jug from which a sick man had drunk that very evening. Rabbi Wolf ran after them. My good people, he said, whatever you found here, I beg you to regard as gifts from me. I don't begrudge you these things to you at all. But please be careful about that jug. The breath of a sick man is clinging to it, and you might catch his disease. From that time on, he said every evening before going to bed, all my possessions are common property, so that in case thieves came again, they would not be guilty of theft. So now we've gone to the other extreme. What do you think about Rabbi Wolf? Is he just extraordinarily naive? Is Reb Wolf just going to let the world walk all over him? What are we supposed to learn from Reb Wolf? Sabrina, please.
I bet he had a stress-free life.
Tell me more. What do you mean?
He isn't bothered by things. He just tries to see the good in everything and stay focused on the goodness of people and their closeness to God.
Yeah, so is the evil of a situation in the situation itself or in our interpretation of the situation? And being robbed is clearly the extreme example of this. Everything and all of his things are taken, and his response is to look for the good in people. So he walks through the world rather than feeling himself a victim of the world. He walks through the world looking for the good in people in every situation. It reminds me a little of someone who's I know has come up in these sessions before, which is Viktor Frankl, who is able to look for the good in the concentration camps. He's able to look for the good in the people who share bread with one another. And Frankl says that everything can be taken away from you except for your attitude. You can choose your attitude. And I think Reb Wolf is choosing his attitude. He's choosing to believe that these are good people, or they have the potential to be good people, that all people want to be good rather than to be bad, and that they're working towards that, but that we all have a ways to go. So I see Bob, then Vicky, and then Sarah.
I think that Rabbi Wolf was successful enough. He accumulated more things that would be available perhaps to be stolen as time went on. And I don't think that he was naive. He was good. And this is, in a way, the most hopeful story so far. And I remember when I had a bunch of roommates and we were robbed, their clothes were stolen and mine weren't. And I was rather upset that the thieves did not take any of my clothes. They tried to tell me that, oh, it's just because I was the wrong size for them, but I didn't believe that.
Yeah, I feel like this is a lesson I learned sometime in the last decade from my partner, actually, where like if somebody cuts me off in traffic, I get angry, and she says, I wonder where they're rushing off to. I wonder, they must be having a bad day, or they must need to get somewhere quickly, right? To assume the best in people rather than the worst in people. To me, there is no greater source of hope than the fact that we are actually capable of seeing the good in people, even in terrible situations. I see Vicky, and then Sarah, and then Jody. Vicky, you're on mute. There you go.
Well, I just unmute. I think that it goes back to the self-reflection. I really think that in order to see that good in people all of the time, you have to be able to have some work done. You've done your own work to be able to do this, or have been given a foundation that's solid enough to be able to do this kind of, to see this, or have somebody with you who, like your partner, saying, I wonder where they're rushing off to give you another point of view there. I think this is a learned behavior. I mean, even Frankl says, if we pause, we can see. I think it's learned behavior, but you have to have some sort of foundation for it. And I want to go back one way to the other. I don't think we were judging on leaving early. I think I looked at it as a suggestion rather than judging someone. So, I mean, that was just an option for the person if able to do so. So we have to look at options, and we're not always judging people to do that. So,
Thank you,
but
Vicky.
there is a lot of hope here. So.
Yeah, thank you, Vicky. I want to just seize on something you said, that this is a learned behavior. To me, that's where the hope is found most of all, that we actually have the ability to influence and be influenced, right? We can learn to see the good in people, whether it's because we do our own work or because we surround ourselves by people who look for the good in people. These are absolutely learned behaviors, and they do make the world better, right? We have the opportunity to sort of shape the world around us with our own attitude, which is part of Frankl's point. Sarah, please.
Yeah, I think that Rav Wolf shows incredible equanimity. And I'm kind of curious and would love your perspective. Why is it that he even says that these were his things? As a Hasid and a follower of the Baal Shem Tov, I would have expected him to say that it all actually belongs to God, and therefore it belongs to all of us.
Yeah, I don't know enough about that aspect of Hasidic thought to say whether, I mean, the Hasidim, I think they did own things. They had houses and things like that. But you're right that some of the attitude is everything I have is a gift from God, right? And things come from God and things go and God gives and God takes away. And so I wonder, although it doesn't say that in the story, I wonder if that's some of the attitude that's behind his reaction to the people, right? That if you live your life in essentially a state of gratitude, thank you for the things I have, then when you lose things, you've actually been building that muscle or that capacity for gratitude, so that then your first reaction will not be about feeling the loss, but rather about feeling the gratitude. And it seems to me that this is a response, the way that Rabbi Wolf responds absolutely comes out of the kind of thinking that you're describing, even if it doesn't say it explicitly here. I appreciate you bringing that theological aspect or a view to this discussion. Jody, I think you get the last word here.
I was just going to say, I love that he forgives trespass against himself. I would be very alarmed if he were that quick to forgive trespass against another more vulnerable person. You know, if someone steals someone else's last loaf of bread, you have to stand up for the victim. So I think the story is carefully framed to not address that point specifically, but how we deal with trespass against ourselves.
Agreed. Yeah, because then it becomes a justice issue, right? And clearly, Reb Wolf does not feel himself a victim. He does not feel that an injustice has been done against him. Although if it was someone else, especially someone vulnerable, as you say, he might have felt or acted a different way. With the 1 minute we have left, I want to just show you a passage from the Talmud. This is a story, not a story, but rather a teaching from Rabbi Abahu that some of you might have heard before, who's talking about tshuva, about what is it to do tshuva, to do repentance. And he says, in a place where penitents stand, even the full-fledged righteous cannot stand. And then he goes on to say, as it is stated in Isaiah, Shalom, shalom larachok v'lakarov. Peace, peace be upon the one who is far and the one who is near. The prophet wishes peace first on the one who is far and afterward on the one who is near. So the one who is far here being the one who is imperfect, the imperfect person, the one who is near here being the tzaddik, the totally righteous person. God wishes peace first to the one who is not perfect. So there's some kind of an idea here that to be totally righteous, I mean, in fact, if we were to really spend time on this Talmud passage, we would see that the rabbis say that to be totally righteous, the totally righteous tzaddik, no eye has seen it, God aside for you. In other words, there's no such thing. Our task is to walk through the world, not looking for perfection, not expecting perfection, but rather expecting ourselves and others to be able to grow, to be imperfect, to make mistakes, but to be beings who are capable of growth. And that ultimately, I think, is the task of the High Holy Days. Judaism never says, gotta be perfect. Judaism just says to be human is to make mistakes. We all do it, all kinds of mistakes. And to be human is to push ourselves to learn and to grow and to try to be our best while looking for the good in other people, even deeply imperfect other people. So that to me is a real message of hope as we walk through the world, and one that at least I'd like to take with me into the High Holy Days. We are not going to meet next week because it's Rosh Hashanah. We will meet the following week, which is a day before Yom Kippur, where we're going to look at the Unatan Tokef prayer, who shall live and who shall die. We're going to ask ourselves, is there any hope to be found in that very harsh, very difficult prayer? So I look forward to that discussion with you 2 weeks from now, and I will wish you all a Shana Tova U'Mituka, a very sweet and happy new year. Thanks, everybody.